Сайн байцгаана уу хүн үзэгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай де факто нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор холбооны Герман улсын КАС Конрад-Аденауэр-Сан гэж байгаа. Энэ сангийн суурин төлөөлөгч ноён Йоханн Фурманнтай ярилцаж байна.
Монгол улс дахь Конрад-Аденауэр-Сангийн суурин төлөөлөгч Йоханн Фурманн Биелефельд хотын их сургуульд улс төр судлалын бакалавр, эдийн засаг улс төр судлалын Лондон их сургуульд олон улсын харилцааны магистрын зэрэг хамгаалсан. Англи, Франц, Орос, Герман хэлтэй Конрад-Аденауэр-Сангийн Европ, Хойд Америкийн багийн ажилтан, Москва хот дахь Конрад-Аденауэр-Сангийн эрдэм шинжилгээ судалгааны ажилтан, Герман улсын Бундестаг гадаад явдлын яамны төрийн нарийн бичгийн даргын ажлын албаны дарга, Христийн ардчилсан холбоо намын эдийн засгийн зөвлөлийн салбарын даргаар тус ажиллаж байсан. 2018 оноос Монгол улс дахь Конрад-Аденауэр-Сангийн суурин төлөөлөгчөөр ажиллаж байна.
So, good morning.
Good morning, Jagal.
You just left your office in Mongolia. Now you are in Berlin. Meanwhile, you continue your job here as a representative of КАС. So we have been working for the last 3 years, and I would like you to please introduce a bit to our audience once again about КАС, history, and cooperation with the world and Mongolia, please.
Yes, thank you, Jagal. The Konrad-Adenauer Foundation came to Mongolia almost 30 years ago and is one of the oldest international organizations to have an office in Mongolia. We came to Mongolia because we were asked by the Mongolian government at that time to help to develop the new democracy in Mongolia and to have talks and to introduce our party system in Mongolia to help to develop the young democracy after the peaceful revolution in Mongolia. And that's why we founded our office almost 30 years ago, working closely together with political parties, but also, of course, introducing other projects. As you know, we are very active in trying to sustain quality journalism in Mongolia. We have programs for young female leaders, and we work together with different NGOs and media outlets in order to try to develop the democracy in Mongolia. КАС has about 120 offices worldwide, and the reason is, Germany is still quite a powerful player in Europe, but we only have 86 million people. So if we want to play an important role also in the future, we need friends and allies in the world. And of course, it was also important for the political parties and the German government to have a stable Mongolia. And that's why we try to help to develop democracy in Mongolia. That's our main goal. But we are not saying that our system is the best system in the world. We are just trying to help. And this is also because our first democracy, as you know, in Germany, the Weimar Republic, it failed. And then we had the really dark time of National Socialism in Germany in the Second World War. So we try to teach about our mistakes rather than coming and saying, we already have the best concept and we know everything. That's not the case. We just know what happens if democracy fails, and that it's very dangerous.
Yep. Okay. Well, we will go one by one about some programs. But at the beginning, I would like to know the foundation structure. Foundations and how does it work? How does it finance? Because it belongs, or it's a part of one political party which is running the country now. How does it work? Funding of this fund and your overall mission.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It started when Germany invested as part of economic cooperation, especially in Latin America. That meant that our development cooperation built infrastructure, streets, roads for friendly countries in Latin America. But what we saw was that military revolutions took place and that the infrastructure was then given to undemocratic leaders. And the idea was that if we finance with GIZ infrastructure projects in other countries, it's very important that there's also some sort of political stability. And that's how our first programs, especially in Latin America at the beginning, started. That's also why we are financed by the Ministry of Economic Cooperation. That's our main funding. As you rightfully point out, the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation is very close with the Christian Democratic Union, the leading party in Germany, Angela Merkel's party, but it's not a part of the party. So we are still independent. That's a very German concept as well, because the Konrad-Adenauer Foundation also has 16 offices or 15 offices in Germany, where we try to also educate the German public. But we wanted to have this kind of political education independent from the state. And that's why officially we are a non-governmental organization. And that's also why we are not part of the Christian Democratic Union, but outside.
It is a continuation of foreign policy of Germany, which is looking for political stability based on the common values in a country where Germany investment goes, where the political and economic relations connected with a particular country. Then once it is a continuation of the German state, is it financed from the budget or where this money comes from?
Yeah, it's financed from the budget. That's also very interesting because it's financed by the budget, as I said, from the Economic Cooperation Ministry. But at the same time, the amount of funding depends on the last 4 general election results from our partner party.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Because your other political parties have also owned similar Stiftung funds. Were there any kind of parallel funding happens, or how does it work?
In Mongolia, for example, there are 2 other foundations, Friedrich Ebert Foundation and Hans Seidel Foundation. We, of course, especially in developing countries, have quite similar goals, but we work together with different partners. So, for example, as you know, one of our main partners in Mongolia always has been the Democratic Party. For Friedrich Ebert Foundation, they work together with the party and also the young generation of MPP, whereas Hans Seidel Foundation is more concerned about the legal framework in Mongolia. So we have different partners, but especially in young democracies, our goals are quite similar.
Well, since I have seen all foundations in Mongolia from the beginning, I think all plays a very important role in establishment of political culture, political education, etc. in the country. And in particular, your foundations have been very crucial from the beginning for maturing the Democratic Party, which at the beginning was a coalition of many political parties, and which, by the way, still have some difficulties today. I mean, probably it's just because it's a part of that democratic process where people are different with their views and we try to get together to be united. And the political party has, in particular nowadays, certain difficulties just before the presidential elections. But however, I would like to go a bit, you started your work in Mongolia, in particular during your, for the last 30 years, on average, maybe you are 10th or so representative of КАС in Mongolia. And now you are nominated, you are going to be in Beijing, into China after Mongolia. You are in a transition now where I understand, expect a new local rep to Mongolia. However, your foundations in particular, under your leadership, have created something very substantial to me as a media people. You have been creating some master's program for journalism. Please tell us about why you're doing that. What is that now? How do you see the influence down the road?
Thank you. Yes, we have introduced together with the National University of Mongolia a new master's program that combines journalism and political education. Because as you know, you are one of the best examples for journalists who are very engaged in politics, who have a great knowledge of the political system, but it's becoming increasingly problematic because, as you know, in Germany, for example, we have political education as a topic in schools. That's not really the case in Mongolia, and it's a problem for journalists because journalists are supposed to control the government, which is, of course, very important, especially since you already said that the opposition has some problems within itself. And so the media is also supposed to control the government. In order to do that, of course, it's important that journalists have a knowledge of the political systems and the workings of the political system. And that's why we sat together with Professor Tuk, who is the head of the political department, and with Professor Nayan Baitar, who's the head of the journalist department for journalism. And we sat together and said, we need to combine forces because we need a master's program where political education is taught, the workings of the political system, but at the same time, people need to be taught what's necessary to be a journalist. And so we tried to combine this. This was founded in 2019. It's a 4-semester program, and so we had our first journalists last year who graduated, and now we have 5 active students.
Okay, how many already graduated?
The first 4, I believe.
4 and now 5 studying.
Now 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's a more far cry than anything here attempted to have journalism, to have a quality journalism, independent journalism in Mongolia. And situation is now different. As you have earlier talking about the certain challenge in Mongolia of democracy is corruption in particular. In that context, what will be the accent, focus point of this new master's program?
Mm-hmm. As I said, it's very important for young journalists to also control and to be able to have the tools to be able to control the government. As you have seen at the SME scandal, you might remember it probably, is that there have been some there has been some very good work from journalists controlling the government, but it's very difficult in Mongolia because, as you know, sometimes it's very unclear who's the owner of a certain media outlet. So politics and politicians play a very big role within the system in Mongolia. So the main difficulty which this master's program can also not solve is, of course, that quality journalism also needs people who are able to pay for it. And that's a problem we are also seeing in Germany. My parents are journalists, and you know, back in the old days, people went to a store and bought a newspaper, and that's how journalists were paid. But this has become increasingly difficult. That's also why the people studying our master's program don't pay for it. We give them a scholarship, so we have applicants because we want the best students and not the students who have the most money to be able to get this kind of education. Of course, we have seen that from our first graduates that many of them already work in the field of journalism now, which is very important. But for the future, not only in Mongolia, but also in Germany, the big question will be who's going to finance this quality journalism, especially because on social media, we have a lot of journalism that is supposedly for free, but we still need to find ways to pay for quality journalism.
Okay, you have been exactly pointing the difficulty we face in Mongolia in journalism. in particular because salaries is very low, people overwork frequently, and they are forced or advised to do only the things that make comfortable their owners of media. And as you also correctly pointed out, that out of some 500 media outlets in Mongolia, according to the journalists borderless, what's it?
Without borders.
Yeah, Journalists Without Border, by the way, Berlin-based, another an international NGO. According to that survey of this organization, out of 500, 2 years back, outlets of media in Mongolia, 75% belong to former or current political leaders. Our presidents have owned media, each of them, I think, for the last three presidents. And really, it's so difficult to have a normal competition because it's politically connected. And you know it very well. You and me have been discussing it in Ulaanbaatar several times. What is the exit other than the preparing quality journalists? What is the other way of regulating that compared with maybe your experiences? I mean, I don't think Angela Merkel has on media, for example, how to restrict them to not to have.
In Germany, of course, we also have state journalism, as you know, which is not really state journalism, but it's channels that are also regulated by boards, not just the government, but also from the general public. Certain NGOs are represented, where real high quality journalism is provided for everyone. And since different political parties, different politicians, but also members of civil society are involved. This is quite an independent sort of journalism, but it's state financed. Every German person has to pay a certain amount of money each month in order to have these channels that were introduced, because we didn't just want a media that is paid by advertisement, so that the headline has to be very scandalous all the time, but we also wanted to have some form of unbiased, regulated quality journalism, especially when it also comes to television stations. So we also have this kind of journalism in Germany, where you can get quite independent political information, but every German person, every household has to pay a certain amount of money each month in order for the system to work and to continue, which I believe has been quite a success, because when you look at media, for example, in the United States, the big channels are always, very much affiliated with one parties because they have to be concerned about viewership. But these channels I'm talking about, they don't have to be concerned about viewership that much because they have their funding anyways. And so they can also, show debates in parliament, have great documentations, and don't have to worry about where the money comes from, which is, I believe, a very good example of how you can have a more balanced sort of journalism and not just private TV stations that are providing information. That has been a success story in Germany, I believe. Mm-hmm.
If you compare with other countries, you have relatively few broadcasting large TV channels like Deutsche Welle. And Deutsche Welle, unlike BBC, what the difference between Deutsche Welle and BBC?
It's of course, Deutsche Welle is active in many different countries. We have worked closely to them, also in Mongolia. As you know, there are also some programs that are also financed by the same ministry as КАС. So the Deutsche Welle Academy, that is also prominent in educating journalists in Mongolia, for example, is also financed by the Economic Cooperation Ministry. What saddens me a little bit is that that GIZ is going to pull out of Mongolia, and that also means that the Deutsche Welle Academy is also going to pull out of Mongolia in the next few years, which has to do with the fact that Germany wants to concentrate the economic cooperation on only 40 countries in the future. But I would say that this program has been quite successful, and we are hoping that КАС can take over some of the good programs from Deutsche Welle, for example, because КАС is going to stay, as are the other political foundations in Mongolia. Even though GIZ, our economic cooperation, is going to pull out of Mongolia, we are going to stay. And so we are trying to figure out which good and successful programs КАС and the other foundations can continue in the future.
In terms of, again, Deutsche Welle, who is financing, who owns Deutsche Welle, for example? I tried just to compare with our public national TV.
Mm-hmm. I have to admit that I don't know who owns Deutsche Welle. I just know the work they are doing outside of Germany, especially with Deutsche Welle Academy. And here I can say that it's financed by the same ministry as the work from КАС.
Okay, a few questions again on the structure. How does it work? You have been working quite for interesting jobs in your country. Particular one being you have been a working group head of State Secretary of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and of German Bundestag, because you have also inside of Bundestag also another ministry. Is it right? So how does it work?
In Germany, like in Mongolia, at least in the past, it was the case that members of parliament can also be ministers or vice ministers. It was not separated. So you can be a minister who's not a member of parliament, but as a member of parliament, you can also become a minister. My former boss was a minister of state in our foreign office, and at the same time, a member of the German Bundestag. That meant that she had a very interesting, very busy life, of course, which meant that, one day she would travel to the United Nations and give a big speech. And in the evening, she would be in her hometown giving a speech at a small party. And so it's two different jobs that are quite interesting. But it also has to do with the fact that, as you know, Germany now has the second biggest parliament in the world after China, with almost 800 members of parliament. We in Germany now have come to believe that these are too many members of parliament. So we are working on ways to have a smaller parliament, because we see that maybe 800 members of parliament are not necessary in order to represent the people of Germany.
Johann, I'm asking also because in relation to your answer about parliament member being a minister in Germany, if you compare it with Mongolia, you have, say, even 15 or so ministers from 800 parliament members is one thing. But when you have 18 of 76 is completely different matter in terms of independence, balance, and check, everything. So that's one of the questions why we were try to avoid, or now limited to only 4 parliament members to be in the cabinet first time, which is, I think, way better directions. On another note, a very interesting question also. You have been replacing your military duty while working in St. Petersburg in Russia with Caritas Foundations in 2004. You're a young man, but still you have been so many interesting jobs, including this one. How you can replace the military duty in Germany, and must everybody go to the military?
In Germany, it was the case that military service was mandatory until about 8 or 9 years ago. I don't know exactly. So at my time, you were supposed to do military service, but about 50% of young men chose to do civil service, which means that you work in some kind of NGO or home for elderly people, or do some kind of community work. And I heard about the chance to also do this kind of social
free of
service
charge
abroad. No, in Germany, military service and also this civil service was something you are paid for. You get a little amount of money, not like a real job, but enough to get by. Let's put it that way. But military service and social service, this was abolished. We now have a professional army, so not everybody has to do it anymore. But you can, of course, still, if you want to, you can still join the army, of course. And if you want to, you can also do another new kind of social service, but it's not mandatory anymore.
A final question is more completely about your personality. You are a very tall guy, and you have been probably the tallest expatriate in the community. And are you able to continue the sport you have been playing when you were younger now?
Because of the pandemic, as you know, it has become more difficult. As you know, we worked out in the same fitness club in Ulaanbaatar, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, it closed down. And the food in Mongolia was very good. So I'm not as in shape anymore as I was before I came to Mongolia. So I hope very much, since fitness clubs are closed here too, that I will get back to my fit former self. But you know, age is something that comes with time. And so my last 3 years in Mongolia were very well spent. So if I look a little bit older now than in the beginning, it's okay, because I know that I replaced my good shape for good memories in Mongolia.
You have been to almost all IMAX in Mongolia. And in general, what you will be missing while you are abroad, I mean, not in Mongolia?
Of course, the Mongolian people, as you know, are very welcoming, very open-minded. That's what I very much liked about my experience in Mongolia, that as a foreigner, you always feel very welcome. It's very easy to get to know a lot of Mongolian people because they have a certain openness, friendliness, not just towards КАС, but also when you stop somewhere along the road in an IMAC where nobody knows who you are, people are always very friendly, very open-minded, very welcoming. That's certainly something that I will miss. And as you have pointed out, I've been to 20 of the 21 IMACs. So I really loved to travel in Mongolia, the beautiful countryside, also the very different landscape, also different kinds of people. You know, if you've been to Bayanulgi, it's very different from some of the other IMACs. So the beautiful nature and the kindship of the Mongolian people, that's certainly something I'm going to miss very much.
Johann, it was a great pleasure to know you, to work somehow in here in the projects, and to have your friendship. And I would like to wish you great success in your future endeavor. In particular, you're going after Mongolia to China, not same country. So all the best.
Thank you so much, Jagal, and I hope to see you again, either in Mongolia, Beijing, or Berlin. And thank you for everything you are doing to promote quality journalism in Mongolia. Thank you.
Thank you, Johann. Хүн үзэгчдээ өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Германы КАС гэж сан байдаг. Конрад-Аденауэр-Сангийн сан гэж. Энэ сангийн захирлаар сүүлийн 3 жил ажилласан ноён Йоханн Фурманн Берлинээс онлайн оролцлоо. Баярлалаа.